Wayne, it's great to see you.
Good seeing you.
I thought we could maybe start at the very beginning, from before your film career to when you arrived in the U.S.
That was 1967. So Hong Kong was going through this big political problem, and there was riots on the streets. My dad basically said, "We're going to get you out of here." And I finished my last year of high school and went to Foothill College in Los Altos.
The plan was to go to medical school, right?
The plan was to go to medical school, so I was taking a lot of biology classes, and I happened to take an art history class, and I really liked it. So I decided to apply for the California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland. Right about that time, I think Tom Luddy opened the Pacific Film Archive. They ran the whole Ozu retrospective, they ran the Saji Ray retrospective, all kinds of Godard. I was so into that I changed my major to film.
I actually discovered you through the Joy Luck Club, and then went back and watched your earlier films. And I still remember encountering Chan is Missing and being really stunned that this film was made at that time.
Hilton, please.
And I've had reason, to go back to the film every few years, and I'm struck by how fresh this film still feels, how inventive it is, and also how it seems to come out of nowhere in a way. What was Chan is Missing, a response to?
When I finished film school, I went back to Hong Kong to work in television, and I was too radical for them, so I got fired. I came back to San Francisco. I couldn't find any work related to my field, so I ended up teaching English to new immigrants. And I said, people don't know what Chinatown really is. These are the real people that are behind the scenes, and they're all so different. I mean, just in terms of the language and dialect they speak, they're different. And I wanted to make a film that's about, Chan, who's a cab driver who's missing, and through the looking for him, you actually find different people in Chinatown.
The cook at Golden Dragon, who wears a Samurai Night Fever t-shirt, drinks milk, chain smokes, and sings "Fly Me to the Moon," all while he's cooking up 5 orders of sweet and sour pork.
It sounds like you were quite a cinephile at the time. It has such an unusual form. It sort of references genre, but it also has such a strong documentary quality. What were the films or filmmakers you had in mind?
Well, I think the French New Wave was a big influence because in the 60s, they were the first ones who took the camera outside of studios and went out into the street and shot narrative films in a very documentary way. And because of that, I was very inspired to shoot on the streets of Chinatown. So, basically Chan is Missing was made up of maybe 6 crew people who were not paid. They believed in what I was trying to do, and we just went out to the streets of Chinatown and improvised and shot where we could. It was the first film that really showed Chinatown for what it is.
How did you situate yourself within, I'm wondering, the context of American independent cinema, which was, just emerging in the early 80s, and also Asian American cinema, which was, I think, barely existed, I think, when you were making this film?
Basically, the teachers told us, just do what you want to do, Don't worry about whether you're going to communicate with an audience. I was very political in being more interested in portraying the Chinese community in a more authentic way.
He came here and he wanted to be, continue to be Chinese, everything, thinking, doing things and all that. And of course, that presents a problem. Now, on the other extreme, you got some people come here and they immediately want to assimilate like the rest of white Americans. And that also presents a problem. They're not white.
One of the things I have to say, these days with all the racism and the hate crimes committed against the Chinese, I could say that Chan is Missing is probably the most political film, juxtaposition against that, because It's about the idea that you can't just easily say this is what the Chinese community is about.
Hey, what's a good place to eat in Chinatown?
Under 3 seconds. That question comes up under 3 seconds, 90% of the time. I usually give them my routine on the differences between Mandarin and Cantonese food and get a good tip.
And like the Chinese itself has so many different dialects and so many different places that people come from. And let alone that, you know, most Americans think Koreans are Chinese or Chinese are Koreans, Japanese are the same. So we have such a long way to go to sort of educate people about, you know, how we are as individuals or as Chinese Americans. And the only way to do it is to make really authentic characters in an authentic story.
Do you make films like sort of in opposition to like films that you've just finished? Because your career is full of these sort of zigzagging paths, and even though I think there are thematic through lines, Dim Sum is a very different way to think about the Chinese American experience than Chan is Missing.
You are correct in saying that I always try to do something different from the film I did before. There was a lot of pressure to so-called make Chan is Missing 2 or Chan is Missing again in a different way, and I didn't want to do that. And also, besides Godard, I was a big fan of Ozu, which is kind of another polar difference. So I wanted to do an Ozu kind of film, again, through the people who were my friends. You know, Laureen Chu was in Chan is Missing. Laureen Chu was a good friend. And I wanted to do a film about her. And she was hanging around with a lot of other women who were all really strong and, in a way, very feminist for their days and really tough Asian American women.
I like them Venetian blinds you got on there, girl. You're the one who gave them to me.
Laureen had a really personal problem with her mother because she was so scared of her mother being alone. And she would feel really guilty if she got married and moved out. So the problem was to find a boyfriend either who would live in the house with them or that she would have to move out and feel even more guilty about that. So I thought that problem, in a way, is a very classic Ozu problem.
It's also a theme that runs throughout your work. I think you've come back to this parent-child dynamic in, I would say, in many films over the years.
I've been kind of mulling that my whole career and my whole life. I have a really, well, I had a really difficult relationship with both my parents. So I think the Ozu films gave me a more optimistic relationship between mother and sons or daughters. But that's also what I saw in Laureen and her mother. There was so much communication. There was a lot of guilt also involved. There's a lot of caring. And I find that very interesting. And maybe it's because it's lacking in my own relationship to my parents.
子雲啊，你應該同阿 Richard 結婚啦。
點解啊？ I'm not ready yet.
好，你哋考咁耐咯，你年紀又咁大啦，應該結婚啦嘛。咁啊，你快啲結咗婚，咁我咪了件心事咯。
In addition to this parent-child dynamic in Dim Sum that's reminiscent of Ozu, there's some formal choices, some stylistic choices in the film that are also evocative of Ozu. I mean, you do your version of the Ozu pillow shot. I think the film is bookended by them, and also you use it as sort of punctuation.
I really fell in love with the pillow shot. They're basically shots of the environment with none of the characters in it, but the shots of these objects or empty places actually said a lot more because of all the dialogue and the emotions that went before. And so with Dim Sum, one of the images that I was attracted to when I first walked into Laureen's house was that everybody took their shoes off. And you can kind of read a little bit about what that house or family was like. So the empty shots were really some of the favorite things about the movie?
If you look at China's Missing as your French New Wave Godard film and Dim Sum as your Ozu film, how would you describe Eatability?
An old-fashioned Hollywood musical is what I call it.
Like to get you on a slow boat to China.
I thought the subject matter was very humorous from the book. I mean, the idea in the 40s, because Asian men could not have families here, they could not bring their wives over. They were all old bachelors going to visit prostitutes, which is how the film opens.
For 60 years, the Chinese couldn't become citizens. And no Chinese woman could come to America.
I kind of wanted to keep the humor of that, the irony of that, rather than make that more serious. So, in a way, I almost did a musical, but that would be too much. I think some people were already saying, oh, you can't do that. That's a really well-known, famous book. You have to be somewhat truthful to it. But I did try to make it more a Hollywood film that was a romantic comedy in a way.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, making one film in response or against the previous one, very different from Dim Sum.
You don't know what to do with this?
My dad took me to a lot of Hollywood movies, and I really wanted to see, well, what is a Hollywood movie? What is that? How is that language different? How can I make that film be more communicative to an audience? How can I make humor work? How can I make things funny? So those are the problems I was dealing with. And yet at the same time, still telling the story that I want to tell, which is about the Chinese American community. So I got the classic good-looking female lead and the good-looking male lead. Probably the best-looking Chinese American lead I could find, and then I made him impotent. So that's sort of the irony of the whole thing.
Shit.
That's a very metaphorical way of saying, something about Chinatown at that time. Yeah. And eatability refers to, in the end, you just have to kind of heal yourself. I mean, because we've been suppressed and we've been discriminated against for so long under these circumstances that you have to find yourself and drink some tea.
You mentioned classic Hollywood, and yeah, it's a film that's, I think, in conversation with classic Hollywood, but we also see a few films in the film.
Well, Lost Horizon is one of my favorite films, and it's so romantic, sort of over-the-top romantic. And I thought the idea, first of all, that a film like that would show in China somewhere where a storyteller would be making up the story and making up the dialogue. I mean, none of it is probably relevant to the film, itself. I guess in a way, I feel like Hollywood movies have influenced all of us, whether we're in a small village in China or in Hong Kong growing up.
I don't care where it is, Michael. Just take me there. Take me quick. Take me.
And also, being in Chinatown, probably in the late 40s, early 50s, you would go to movies. And that's where Lady of Shanghai came in.
This question, I think, that ties these films together, this exploration of the Chinese-American experience, the in-betweenness of that condition. I feel like it's something you do come back to, at different stages in your career.
Well, actually, after the Joy Luck Club came out, everyone thought that I could only make films about Chinese Americans. Every investor, every studio head I went to was kind of boxing me in on that. I even boxed myself in. So I just said, I'm not going to do more Chinese films for the moment. And I went and did Smoke and Blue in the Face. And then I had a chance to do a more Hollywood film, and I said, well, why not? I needed to make some money by then. I was in my 40s. I didn't even have health insurance. So I thought, let's learn how to make Hollywood films. And I remember hearing both Ang Lee and Justin Lin talk about, working in Hollywood. And they both felt, how many feature films get made every year? Let's say 20 tops. And out of the 20, if there was a Chinese American making one of them, that's really special. I was thinking, I said, well, if I have the chance and there are no other Chinese really doing it, Ang Lee came just a little bit behind me. I just felt, I should just go into it and see what I can learn from it. So I made like maybe 4 or 5 Hollywood films. I got caught up in it. And then I had to jump out of that box and I said, okay, let me find another short story or novel. And I found Yeong Lee and I did 1,000 Years of Good Prayers. One of the things I find really interesting is that there were people online saying that Wayne Wang doesn't really exist, that Wayne Wang is a fake name that different filmmakers use because his films are so different. And my wife used to say, you're like a bird without legs. You're like a bird flying around and never really landing anywhere, which is also kind of true. So I like that I am not one thing, that I am many different filmmakers in one.
I've never heard that conspiracy theory before that you don't exist, but that's a good one.
Yeah, that's a very good one.
Wayne is missing, yeah.
Wayne is missing, okay.